Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Mark Palmer, who's Chief Counsel of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism, and he has a great insight as to how the Golden Rule can help promote professionalism, civility, and integrity amongst lawyers and judges, as well as in the use of AI. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, and I'm thrilled to have as my guest today, Mark Palmer. And I think Mark has a really interesting perspective on ethics, but the law too, and how they go together. I think his work on professionalism is really a different point of view that I think we all need to embrace. And I'd love to hear more from him. So, Mark, if you can introduce yourself a little bit and we can get to know you better.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I've known you for several years in this space and got to know a lot of other people. And it's always exciting to kind of have this type of opportunity to kind of dig maybe a little deeper in what do we do in our day-to-day life, or what do we do as our purpose and our mission in our organizations. And I'm excited to share that with you today some. And part of my role, what I do, my title is Chief Counsel of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism, which is kind of a mouthful. And that's why we created our tagline, our tag name of To Civility, the number 2 civility, which some of you may know us from as well. And that's also our website. To plug that, tocivility.org is where you'll find everything about us and what we do in Illinois for the judges, the lawyers, and all 9 law schools in Illinois as well.
So I want to freeze that for a second and ask a little bit more, because I remember when I first, heard that that you work for the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. I was like, what is that? I hadn't heard of a professionalism, committee, or like that there was any dedication to that. I'm licensed in California. There is no commission on professionalism, although I think there should be. What's its mission? Like, what are some examples of what it does? How does it go about achieving its goals?
Yeah, so we're currently a small shop. We're a team of less than 10, but we are charged under an actual created Supreme Court rule in Illinois, Rule 799, which created us over 10 years ago, really initially as a response to the instances of incivility in the legal profession, and mostly wrapped around litigation, to be specific. But it was where the justices of the Supreme Court said we need to put specific focus on not just increasing the principles of integrity and professionalism and civility, but how do we actually start doing a better job of educating our lawyers, and also having other types of programmatic and educational outputs, and mentoring and research even as well, and writing, all these things combined to keep on the cusp of improving those types of commitment to eliminating or at least combating whether it be biases, inequalities, and different types of aspects that we saw at that time, and we continue to see to a degree, of course. And I want to make it clear, we are not a disciplinary type of entity. I like to say we're much more of the proactive side of that conversation. We certainly do get involved sometimes in disciplinary matters to re-educate or help educate. But for the most part, we are facing the audience of the judiciary. We are facing the audience of the practicing lawyers in Illinois, which there's just under 100,000 registered attorneys in Illinois. And we also are involved at the beginning of that process. So we have a presence in the law school setting in Illinois. And like I mentioned, there's 9 law schools across Illinois, including most of them in Chicago. While we work out of Chicago primarily, I'm actually based down in Champaign-Urbana, where the University of Illinois is, go Illini. And that's where I have an office. And I'm actually sitting today talking to you, Tom, at the College of Law at the University of Illinois. So, and we can talk a little bit about that too. But so what do we do though? What are those outputs I mentioned? A big part of it is education. And that directly goes into doing CLE development for those audiences, of course, both online and in person, and now a lot virtual as well. And there's that, and that's a large component. We're also charged with reviewing and approving all the professional responsibility credits that other providers are supplying in the CLE education chain. So we have to be up on what qualifies as appropriate educational tools. And in Illinois, we used to have 5. Now we have 6, and I'll tell you why that recent change happened. Those 5 classic pillars we've had are civility, professionalism, ethics, mental health, substance abuse, and addiction, and the last one being diversity, equity, inclusion. We just recently, as in earlier this month, in February 2024, we added a 6th pillar of professional responsibility education in Illinois, and that is sexual harassment prevention. And that's pretty novel across the United States, from what I understand. More and more states are doing requirements for having that type of training across industries, including the profession. We have that law actually in Illinois that you have to have that type of training, but it's not really equated to CLE. But now we have it as an integral part of required CLE courses that Illinois lawyers have to take every 2 years. So there's that element. And then we do some other programming. I mentioned mentoring is a big element we've delivered for over 10 years. We have a lawyer-to-lawyer mentoring program that pairs new lawyers in their first 5 years of practice with seasoned practitioners, which is fantastic. It gets great reviews. And then we do other trainings. A real popular one we've grown over the years recently is going into courthouses, even, where we address what is the patron's experience in a courthouse and how can we help the entire ecosystem of a courthouse make that experience better for the courthouse patron, who's usually a self-represented litigant. So whether they're represented by a lawyer at their side or not, what is that experience for them from stepping in the front door to approaching the bench and everything in between? And we involve the entire courthouse community, clerks, bailiffs, deputies, translators, judges, lawyers, and so on, through that process and that training as well, including access to justice issues and such. So there's a lot we're doing. And through all that, we're also writing a lot. As you may have picked up, my niche is on legal education or legal technology education a lot. And we'll talk more about that for sure.
Wow. It sounds like a much broader scope than I originally had in mind that the commission is working on, and quite ambitious. Not to put too fine a point on it, but to bring it back for a second to civility, like what's an example, like for people listening to this, like what's an example of incivility that amongst attorneys that we're talking about here?
It is measured on a spectrum, I think. And if I litigated for 10 years. I know, Tom, you're a former litigator as well. And as you think about moments in your own career of what was incivility measured by, or what instances might you have come across, I think on one end, you can have situations where it's just lack of cooperation, or some say rudeness, things like that, just not being friendly. While that's not necessarily a violation of the rules of professional conduct, it really wears on you in all types of ways. It's clearly inefficient for the delivery of justice and so forth. And you can measure that continuum up the chain to levels entering situations of harassment and worse. And when it gets to that point, then you maybe are reaching into levels of disciplinary issues and so forth. But we want to cut the head off that dragon early on and bring in not just the next generation of lawyers to have them understanding and educated on the right way to practice law, to engage with clients, to engage with the judiciary, to engage with other counsel, including opposing counsel. But also understand that will also be the most effective, efficient, and equitable way to deliver justice. So it really is an understanding, because I think from public perception a lot, and this kind of waxes and wanes over the years as the legal profession gets notoriety in the media, for better or for worse. We have a high hill to climb on showing that we can be the deliverers of justice and help you solve their problems. And we want people to come to lawyers, to trust our system and have the transparency and the confidence in what we do. And it starts with us, hopefully making an impact in those educational fronts, and hopefully less of an impact on the reactive side, on the disciplinary side, which frankly we have seen decreases in disciplinary matters in recent years, and hopefully that's a trend that's going to continue.
And I do remember back when I was litigating that there were certain sharp practices and gamesmanship that people engaged in and still do. And it really detracts from dealing with the matter on the merits and resolving it to everyone's maybe not satisfaction, but doing it in a way that is a clean, ethical, and puts the issue to bed. So kudos to you and the commission for working on that. One other thing I just want to mention is that I really like the fact that you're working, like, not only centering the lawyer and lawyer behavior, but also like looking at the impact on the people who, at the end of the day, are the ones that we're trying to provide services to and benefit with our justice system.
Let me speak on that for a second, because that's something so I've been doing this about a little over 8 years now. And when I first took this job, I was in litigation beforehand, basically as a trial lawyer at a firm. And when I transitioned to this, I really had initial tunnel vision that, I'm going to be helping lawyers and educating lawyers. And the more I've been in this position, I haven't completely pivoted away from that, but the perspective of the client has been much more important in recent years. And I think that's appropriate. And I've seen, actually, looking at not just the legal tech space, but the access to justice space, and other areas of how our profession functions, and many times is argued should function, it's from the client-centered perspective. And I'm a big believer in that. And the more I've learned in this space and educated in this space and been educated by others in this space, the more I think that's true, because that's what it is at the end of the day. We want to be trusted. And if we're going to stay a strong, vibrant profession and reach the goals that hopefully many of us went to law school or otherwise became a legal professional to do, is to serve that client. And sometimes that client is the public, sometimes that client's the government, and sometimes that client's a municipality, and so forth. But at the end of the day, looking at it from that perspective really has increased my abilities to deliver in what I do.
So another piece of your background, congrats on recently being appointed to the Illinois Supreme Court AI Task Force. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And so lots of questions. What is the task force going to do? What's its mission? What's your role in it? And have you guys met yet? Like, what are the kinds of things you'll be working on?
Yeah. So, like many courts around the country, Illinois is among them in launching an AI task force. The way we have it positioned in Illinois is our court, our court has had, it's now on its second, I believe, multi-year strategic agenda. So it has certain prongs of achievements it's trying to do on a statewide level through our Supreme Court. Part of that agenda is where is the umbrella under which the AI task force sits, and its actual strategic initiative that it sits under is labeled as the fair, timely, and efficiency of courts, which I think is appropriate. I really like how efficiency is in there, because I think that's a huge benefit that AI, particularly generative AI, will change, not just in the private practice and the legal profession, but I think it does have great opportunity in the judiciary. So part of our task force charge, and we're just getting started, to be frank, we're a task force of about 20 judges, practitioners, academics, and we're looking at what's the possibility and where do we need to take both regulatory attention to these issues, but also what are the benefits? How can we take this and implement the opportunities to improve what we do in the court? Our Chief Justice is often quoted as saying that the courthouse is not a place; it's a service, and I think that's a good way to look at it. It really is a service. So we're looking at what types of policy guidelines and maybe even court rules are required for this. That's pretty obvious. That makes sense that we'd look at that. But I think we're also going to be looking at how do we educate the legal and judicial professions on this, and also how are we going to help those courthouse patrons as well, which I'm glad that's part of our charge, is examining, kind of like I hinted to at our training we do. We're going to look at how can we get that trickle down effect into the people coming into our actual facilities and being served more efficiently and effectively and transparently on how this is all done. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a continuing element of the judiciary as well, AI. So as it evolves quickly, I think the task force charge will evolve, but I think it's going to be a permanent fixture to some degree in how we operate in the courts as well as in private practice. And I hope Illinois will stay on the front of that.
Well, given the rapid progress and expansion of the use of AI in the practice of law and pushback to it, and these continuing cases that we've seen even today where lawyers are mishandling information they get from AI, there's going to be a lot of work for you to have on your plate.
Yeah. And we have some very good, realistic and practical individuals appointed. So I'm really anxious to see the outputs.
And you'd mentioned you're on the faculty. So what kind of classes do you teach? Like what are the things that you like to focus that attention
on? So even before I took this job, when I was in private practice, I was teaching at the University of Illinois College of Law here, mostly in coaching the trial teams and coaching and teaching trial advocacy class. So very practical courthouse type of skills, and literally things I was doing there during the day, I would go at night and repeat those for my students and teach them. And many of those students, 10, 15 years ago have now become fellow colleagues in the bench, and some in the bar, or some on the bar, many in the bench, some on the bar, or you get the point. Some have become judges, many are lawyers, and become friends along the way. I don't teach right now. I do a lot of guest lecturing in classes on specific topics, but due to my travel schedule and other commitments with my full-time job with the commission, not teaching anything right now, but that's where the past has been. And there's been some unique opportunities to lecture in academics in law school. One I enjoyed for several years was teaching a class, a guest lecture class on ethics for law clerks, which is a unique niche with some actually very strict rules, as you might imagine, for what somebody clerking for a judge, either a state or federal judge, each kind of have their own unique rules. But you have to be very careful with that. And those are some ethical considerations you wouldn't otherwise learn in law school unless you were specifically preparing yourself to possibly try to get a clerkship with a judge, for instance. But kind of cool.
And I understand you've done some training with law enforcement, right? Or of law enforcement. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I also taught at the University of Illinois Police Training Institute for several years. My main focus was in police liability issues, and kind of a combination of training the lawyer or training the to be police officers how to think like a lawyer in analyzing how they're responding to a call, or specifically use of force calls or things that might um, otherwise bring about some type of civil liability action potentially against them, how to properly address that, not necessarily the details of the use of force training itself. I'll leave that up to other professionals, but the legal side of it, how to properly document that, write a report, things to look for, things to be prepared for. So when and if you are sued as a police officer, um, how to be prepared for that situation. So I did that for a while, and which kind of coincides with the beginning of my career was actually as a police officer. I say I kind of throughout my 25 years of law, starting in 1999, it started as a police officer for a brief period of time before I pivoted and went to law school. So I have that background, which has actually really afforded me a lot of good opportunities and relationships during my time as a private practice lawyer too. So it was an interesting background to have.
And your father was a lawyer too, right?
Yep. Yeah. My dad was was a lawyer and a father, lawyer for 53 years, right in the
Wow.
same town I now live in, Champaign, Illinois. So he actually mentored a lot of attorneys throughout the years, and he actually held a lot of positions locally. Um, and I think he's maybe the only attorney at one point was the public defender and the state's attorney and assistant city attorney as well at one time. So he really wore a lot of hats through his career and had a great career. And so he's always been a hero to look up to and idolize, and always gave me very simple and structured advice that I actually carry into a lot of the education I deliver now. It sounds silly, but one of the one of the main pieces of advice, and I try to tell this to the people I mentor a lot, is really be nice to everybody. And that sounds so simple, like the golden rule, right?
The golden rule.
But you see it all too often where people just treat other people poorly, and or discount who they are, what they're doing, and um, you know, I always say, especially those gatekeepers of information, get to know everybody, get to know the person working the door, the clerks, the administrative assistants. Um, they're the ones that can really make your job more enjoyable, and it makes their job more enjoyable too. And it really builds your background and your reputation. Excuse me.
I totally agree with you. It's much needed in the legal profession, much needed in all professions, in all business, really. One of my first jobs was working in the movie business, and sometimes people, would think pretty highly of themselves, and the way they would treat, assistants at the desk when they would check in.
Exactly.
Within a short period of time, a Hollywood assistant could become a Hollywood producer, and the tables change, and you never know, and just from like a, not necessarily a transactional viewpoint like that, but also just from a moral standpoint, you feel better when you treat people well. And it's good to have good relationships with people. Like, why not? What
Exactly.
are you going to lose?
Exactly. It's it has a great ROI on the energy output you do when you do that, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. And so that's a commonality that I see with you, Mark. Like the through line, to borrow from Hollywood again, the through line that I see throughout all these different things that you've done in your career to date have all had kind of that golden rule as an organizing principle, from the training of the police officers to the commission, which deals with that on a professional level for lawyers, as well as even with the AI task force. All of them are of a piece. And I think it's fantastic that you've been able to pursue that in all those different ways.
Yeah, a lot of doors have been open for me, and I totally um, embrace that and recognize that. And probably a lot of those doors were open for me that maybe I didn't deserve fully at the time, at least. But I've taken on those challenges as best I can, and hopefully raise the tidewaters along the way for the next generation and the next people that I hope to pass the reins to. Whether it's my local community, whether it's my state, whether it's the legal tech community, which I really do consider my family. And, you know, I'm just, I'm not ready to be done with it I think we got a lot more decades together to see some really cool things happening too.
I totally agree with you. And let's use that as a perfect segue to talk about AI, because I think you bring a unique perspective to it. Let's look at these questions through your lens of ethical compliance, the golden rule, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really looking forward to what your thoughts are. The first, question is, I'm sure you have, like the rest of us, over the past year and a half, had an opportunity to play around with AI. You've definitely read news and developments about AI. What what concerns do you have about it?
Mm-hmm. Um, I my when you say what concerns, and I think you hinted about this earlier. Yes, there's concerns that people are filing hallucinated cases and those kinds of things. My biggest concern because of that is that people will not be optimistic about it. I think that's the simplest way to say it, that we will quickly shut it down, limit it. And I'm not to say you shouldn't take great caution and educate yourself properly. But I think the quickest way to deter innovation and to a degree even evolution of it is to be scared of it or hamper its progress from the start or be a pessimist. When I think about AI and specifically Gen I immediately think, yes, this is huge. I think that is absolutely true. This is colossal. And two, I want to be, and I think I am, an optimist about it. Um, and even beyond the legal profession, then when I think about this, I think Gen AI will help us think more deeply to uncover new ideas for humanity. That sounds cheesy, but it's damn true. And some uncovered, either lost ideas, forgotten ideas, or some unsolved truths that we haven't really been able to even wrap our arms around because we just haven't had the ability to yet. I think this is going to open some brand new doors. I've heard some quotes and some figures thrown out there by people who are a lot smarter than me, comparing this to the Industrial Revolution, for example. And they're saying not only is this moving 10 times faster than the Industrial Revolution did, it's on a scale 300 times its size, which I can do that math. That math means it's got 3,000 times the impact of the Industrial Revolution. That's crazy. But I don't think it's unrealistic either. Um, so, and to play off that some more, I think we're so familiar with the advancement of computational power, and I know this is a big part of what you do on a day-to-day basis, Tom, with all your work with LawDroid. we're all very familiar with in the past 40 years. I can think back to the Apple IIe computer I played with as a kid and played Oregon Trail and things with, and that was huge at that time. And clearly that computational power has advanced up to the cell phones we carry around today, which is just mind-boggling. But I think we do lose track, though, of the amount of data that has increased in that same time period of 40 years or more. Um, that's a little more vague thing to see on a day-to-day basis, but boy, is it there. And I saw there was a speech made just or late last year by a high up executive or a high up court member in the UK who was citing Google statistics from 2010. And what they said was, and this is fascinating, from the beginning of human civilization up until the year about 2003, we created, as human beings, we created 5 million terabytes of information. So that's 5 exabytes, 5 million terabytes. And 5 million terabytes doesn't sound like a whole, I mean, it's a lot, yes. But for all of human civilization, 5 million terabytes is what we created up until 2003. By 2010, we were making that same amount every 2 days. We were making 5 million terabytes every 2 days. And now, according to Richard Susskind, who I think is a pretty good authority, he says we'll soon be generating 5 million terabytes every hour. So the amount of data is colossal. And then when you parallel or parse that data into the power of Gen AI, which eats data, it lives and thrives for data, it's a beautiful marriage. And that's where we are today. And when you think about those two things combined, computational power and the amount of accessible data, that's why this is huge. That's why I'm an optimist.
Wow. That's a lot to wrap one's head around. I like what you're saying about, that AI in a way, and I know I'm using the general term and without parsing it further, but
Mm-hmm.
that AI gives us the space. It gives us the space to do more that we haven't been able to do before. And a kind of, metaphor is, how like every day, like we talk to people about things we'd like to do that we can't because we're too busy and we just don't get to it. I think, to use your analogy, like in a way, we as humanity have not been able to focus on certain problems and solving them because we've been too busy. And that AI in a way is this, it's this opportunity to have more time to do more things because now we can actually have the focus of AI working with us to solve these things. And so, yeah, I, along with you, speaking of the choir, but I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to solve a great many problems that we haven't had time to. But I'd also like to explore with you these opportunities and what AI can do. Are there ethical issues that it brings up for you that you think we should be cognizant about, that we should be careful about?
Yeah, I think there's some big ones and some smaller, more detailed nuances. And we need to spend a whole hour going into the nuances, but I think the big ones that I've written about already and I've seen others educate on, and I think totally appropriately so, and we will certainly continue to educate on. And again, I like to put myself in the shoes of the client to look at these things because really that's what the rules of professional conduct are based on. They're meant to protect the client, if you think about it. Many would argue they're meant to protect the profession, and I think to some degree that can be true. But at the end of the day, what is needed to be done when using AI ethically? Confidentiality is one of the main keys, and that usually comes first. Well, really what comes first is competency, as Rule 1.1 dictates. And we've seen, I think we're up to 40 or so states have adopted 1.1 Common 8, which comes up in about every legal technology seminar you go to, appropriately so. Um, and, and I think AI falls in that. But after competency, you quickly get to confidentiality. And I hope this is where I've already seen organizations, be it law firms, be it corporate law departments and the like, push out policies, knee-jerk reactions that are do not use AI, do not talk about AI, do not let those words leave your lips. I get it, right? But again, that goes to the danger I talked about earlier. I firmly believe those same organizations are going to be coming back within a year to 6 months and hopefully going to, if not be saying the opposite, be saying something close to the opposite, that you must use AI, but you have to do it ethically and carefully and well trained to do so. So, for instance, as a lawyer, I am not going to, and I should never go on to ChatGPT and put in client information or a specific client fact pattern or the like. It should be used to speak in hypotheticals and so forth. Are there ways to still do that with proprietary tools? As you well know, Tom, there certainly are ways to get around that protection and have a closed database or a closed source where you're still using the power and harnessing the amazing tool of GPT, but you're not doing it through Chat GPT and some type of open platform where it's going to possibly be used to educate more computers. Simply said, that's confidentiality part of it. Communications, I think disclosure or not to your client if you're using AI, I think there's a marketing aspect to that, but I think there's also we're going to see lawyers more and more having those conversations with their clients because I think the clients are going to be bringing them up and should be bringing them up. So again, I feel like a broken record sometime talking about how the tail is wagging the dog, but that's what I mean when the client is going to be driving a lot of this, driving that communication requirement on, are you using AI for my case? Or even more so, you better be using AI for my case if it means it's going to be a lot more effective and efficient and you're going to be a better lawyer for me. I want you to do that. And I think we're going to be seeing more of that pretty quickly as people realize what's going on here. And similar to that will be the relation of the impact on billing for lawyers. Built into those rules are that we have to only charge our clients the reasonable fee, the reasonableness factor. Well, if GPT helps me do legal research or analyze opponent's brief in a matter of minutes that would have otherwise taken hours, I can't be charging them for hours. That's pretty obvious. So we're going to see an evolution, I believe, in how billing is affected. And we've been talking about this. The death of billable hour has been talked about for 40 plus years. But I think this is another big stab in the side of the billable hour and how law firms, again, from the client's perspective, that tail wagging the dog, the client is going to be the demander of a different type of billing structure or at least different types of billing examinations and discounting. And if the firms aren't going to pivot and embrace these tools, those clients are going to go somewhere that will. So that's just a few things that pop into my head when we're talking about the ethical side of it. Again, looking at mostly from the perspective of the client.
I'm kind of curious. I don't know if this makes sense, but because you deal with professionalism, like, do you think that there's a slice of that you need to take into consideration with AI? Like, you gave a great overview about the ethics, but is there some piece where professionalism comes into it that we need to consider?
Oh, I can think of lots of ways. And I think this is where lawyers, if you go back to the Delta model lawyer, okay, if you're familiar, if you've heard that term, if you haven't and you're listening to this, Google the Delta model lawyer. It's a it's a way to examine the competency of the legal profession, and Cat Moon at Vanderbilt Law, and I'm losing track of the professor up at Northwestern Law who's also part of that. Um, but one of the sides of that delta, that triangle, you have substantive law, you have client communication, and you have the business of law, is basically the three sides of that triangle. I think there's great potential in the client communication side of that triangle for AI, in how you respond to emails, everything from how you respond to a negative online review, which I've already written about. And I've written about a lot in the past, well before the AI explosion has happened. It's another great tool to brainstorm on ideas on how can I have turnkey solutions to engaging with my client that isn't necessarily a legal related issue. It's a customer service related issue. And that's where you can really propel your abilities to be professional and civil. And it all, at the end of the day, it makes you a more marketable lawyer. I, I, I really think that lawyers need to take advantage of that more often and think that way more often. That's one of the lessons that was really ingrained in me as a young lawyer from the start. And I'm really glad that my senior partners at my firm I worked at, from day one, they made it very clear, Mark, you will, as soon as possible, be returning every phone call and returning every email. And if you don't have the answer, you will at least respond and say, I have your question and I'm working on it and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Or you'll be blunt and candid with them and say, look, I'm not the person for this problem for you, but let me get you to somebody who can. That type of attitude and so forth, you can use AI tools to do those types of responses even better and more efficient and effective. And we just need to get in that new mindset of applying those tools to that type of thing. So those, I could just say that same thing about any industry, but the legal profession needs to embrace those attitudes too. And that is being professional.
I like that. So professionalism is kind of a gauge for client satisfaction, and that AI can help us to be better delivering satisfying services.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of marketing aspect and the business of law and the client communication aspects that we need to not lose sight of when we're also using AI tools for legal research and drafting and the like as well.
One example I could think of off the top of my head, and I think maybe you put this out there, but that you mentioned the negative review. So like when you get a negative review, of course, every attorney's natural reaction is to be defensive because, come on, they're kind of attacking us, right? It's human nature to be defensive. But taking the moment, taking the step to react or to put out there something that's professional is where you have to give yourself a little distance from that initial emotional reaction, and then, provide, hey, thank you for bringing up that point. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to think about this and work on employing, a different process or something like that. Some way that would be proactive, and that AI actually can take in the negative review and provide that kind of measured response if you direct it to.
Yeah, and even take what you've drafted, and hopefully that draft isn't the knee-jerk reaction draft a minute after you read it. It's hopefully you've gone back maybe the next day and drafted a response and thought about it some more. But it's a great option to put in an input as a potential response and say, can you make this a little nicer, or compare yourself to the hotel industry that's so good at responding to negative online reviews, because probably who gets more than those. Maybe restaurants and hotels are the great examples of how to do that appropriately. But they don't have the codes of conduct that we must abide by as well. So there's that factor too, where we can't obviously give out confidential information or some states even say you can't give out public information in a response to an online review. So you have to be very careful with what you're doing and be very limited to even make the decision, should I respond to an online review? But that's a very popular topic. I talk to a lot of attorneys about what's the best way, and there's lots of different ways to skin that cat.
So let's say a lawyer was coming to you and wanted some practical tips on how they should employ AI in their practice in a responsible way. Like, what are a couple of pieces of advice or guidelines or suggestions you would make to them that they should keep in mind so that they don't go foul of any of the ethical rules?
I'd first want them to be comfortable with it and be properly trained with it. So I would tell them, if you haven't even tried it before, just go on AI, go on ChatGPT. It won't even cost you anything, and just play around with it. And it doesn't have to be legal questions. Enter the ingredients you have in your fridge and ask it what you can cook for dinner, or to suggest some other movies to another movie you like, and things like that. Have a conversation, get to understand that it's not a Google search. It's a different type of creature. I'd also suggest for them to get at least a broad understanding of how Gen AI works. Some of the terminology, why it hallucinates, and where do those hallucinations come from, and why are they actually logical in their nature. If you understand how the systems work, why is it hallucinating? What are the vectors creating those hallucinations? And understand what temperature means and things like that. I think it doesn't take a lot of education and training to grasp those things, and I think it's beneficial for a lawyer before they dive right into doing legal research or really wrapping their arms around it, to have a little bit behind the scenes understanding of what's going on. They don't have to have a CS degree, but they have to have a basic grasp of it. And then find training opportunities to cover the ethical side of it, as I mentioned, to be sure you're doing it right. And if nothing else, treat it like an associate attorney, or treat it like an assistant. You're going to be reviewing its work. You're going to be checking it before you either push it out to a client, push it out to a court, or otherwise let it leave your grasp. So, utilize, but double check too.
100%. Experiment, training and education, and supervision and management. That does seem to be the missing key in a lot of these news stories that we're hearing, is a complete lack of the last part, supervision.
Yeah, and that's always an ethical rule I bring up in almost every scenario, because it's so valuable. Rule 5.1 and 5.3, not just supervision of other lawyers, but supervision of other legal professionals, and even vendors, even independent contractors, anyone having a touch point with your organization. You have a responsibility, an ethical obligation under 5.3 to supervise reasonably what they're doing and how they're doing it. So that could be as obscure as the cloud vendor or where you store your information. You have a responsibility to analyze the security of that information and the processes. That's part of your obligation. So always have that mindset as a lawyer in what you're doing.
And I know how we all love terms of service and reading them.
Great
Reading.
Great for night side reading before you go to bed.
Right, but and it's something where AI can help too. Just feed it in, give the high points. You don't have to read the whole thing yourself.
For sure.
So with all of that, where do you think things are going in the next 10 years? Do you see law firms, are they going to look exactly the same? Are we going to have exactly the same arguments about the billable hour versus value pricing, for example? Are there going to be as many associate lawyers? Like, what are your thoughts about that? I know it's an unfair question, but
No, it's not. It's a needed question, and it's something we need to always be thinking about, the short term and the long term. I mentioned his name earlier, Richard Susskind, and I think he's argued and said, and I think rightfully so, that the short terms effects of this will be over exaggerated, and the long term effects will be under exaggerated. And I think I agree with that. Um, I, I think we get really excited, especially people like you and me, Tom, who are in this space constantly having these discussions. And we kind of get to that point where we feel like, and probably the people listening to this, um, we get to that point where it feels like an echo chamber sometime of, is the legal profession listening to us? Do they realize how exciting this is? But at the end of the day, the majority of lawyers out there are solo small firm practitioners across the country. Across the US and Canada, those make up the real heart and soul of practicing law. And I want that audience to get involved and do it, but not be scared of this. The robots are coming to replace us. And I think it was Jack Newton who said, and I really like this. I think it was him or Joshua Lennon or somebody from Clio mentioned the phrase lawyers or AI will not replace lawyers with robots. The promise of AI is to extract the robot from the lawyer. And I really like that thought, that way to think of it. Extract the robot from the lawyer. So you're eliminating the routine, repetitive work, and you're allowing more time for the lawyer to be a human in servicing the client. That's what I want to see. That's what I want the clients to be coming for us to be paying for the value we deliver in the training and skills and experience we have as lawyers or should have as lawyers. That's where our value comes from. And that value is going to remain with AI in the future. And it's only going to be more enhanced. It's like if you're into cooking, I like to cook. That's kind of one of my big hobbies, and cooking meals for my family. If you ever make a good roux, that's how you make it. You just cook it for hours and hours and just cook it down, cook it down, cook it down. And it gets better and better and better. That's what I want. I want to have a concentrated recipe for delivering the human factor, the intellectual factor of problem solving for our clients, and let the robots take away the routine, repetitive work, hopefully, and get better at that. So, and I think that will that's not going to maybe even get fewer lawyers. That'll maybe even get more lawyers and more legal professionals, not just lawyers. We compare it to also often to the medical profession on how they're structured in their hierarchy of delivering medicine and healthcare, from the MD down. I really do think the future of the legal profession could be structured that way, but we have a lot of regulatory hoops to jump through before we get there. That's probably a whole nother conversation, though.
Really well put, Mark. And definitely share that vision with you. I hope that's the direction that things go.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the hour, and I just wanted to jump into there's 3 personal questions I jump into at the end because I like to get to know my guests better, and I know that our audience would like to. The first one I think you already answered, which is, who's your inspiration? And I think that would be your father.
Yep, he definitely is. His background and his lessons taught to me over my many years always pop up, and they pop up with other colleagues who knew him well too. So that's a testament of the foundation he laid for me, and I'm very thankful for that. And I know he'd be proud of it today, for sure.
And what makes it all worthwhile for you doing all this?
Hopefully leaving things better than I found them. It's that simple. I was a Boy Scout growing up, and we had a former military troop leader who was very regimented and such. And one thing he always drove home every time we left a campsite not only did you leave the campsite as good as you found it, that wasn't good enough. You had to leave the campsite better than you found it. So you had to pick up every bit of trash you could possibly find, leave nature undisturbed, and improve things always. And I always have that picture, and I try to pass that lesson on to my kids, my daughters. Whether it's their messy room, literally or figuratively in the real world, how they improve their friends and relationships and learning that they do. I just hope that in the legal profession, the places I have made an impact are better for it. And I can be proud when I someday retire in my community to see things improved and going in the right direction.
I think that's great. And it coincides with a Native American approach, which is to think of the next 7 generations,
Mm-hmm.
And what our effect is on them in everything that we do. Last question. What is your best childhood memory?
Oh boy, best childhood memory. Gosh, I really had a great neighborhood growing up. I was very fortunate to have, you know, the friends on the block, kind of classic 1980s neighborhood of bike riding and playing basketball almost every day until you couldn't see anymore because the sun had gone down, and really having a childhood of a lot of different friends from different backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds. Since I grew up in a university-based community, I really was exposed to uh, a lot of diverse friends from diverse experiences, and that really improved who I was going into my secondary education and beyond. And I don't think I realized it so much when it was happening, because it was just all I knew. But going into college and law school and beyond, I look back and I think of the foundation that created for me. Um, that's I had I had a blast as a kid, but I also learned a lot that I didn't even know I was learning until I became an adult. And that may sound strange, but I I realize also a lot of people don't have that and don't get those opportunities or very different opportunities. So um, I hope that I can have the vision and the ability to listen to others today and understand that their upbringing may be different, and and hopefully make an impact and keep learning. Just keep learning about it.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your experience and wisdom with us today. I think there's a lot to think about with where we're at right now with professionalism, with AI, how to rethink our profession. It's a lot to wrap our heads around, and I think you've given us a lot to work with in guiding us through that change. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom, for being a constant voice in this space and letting me have a voice today. And to all you listening and watching this, please don't hesitate to reach out and engage with me and Tom in the future. I really think we are better together and learning from each other. And those types of experiences are going to be even more important as we improve the legal spaces, but more importantly, the societal spaces that we can impact in the future. So thanks a lot. Hope to see you again soon.
Well, one last thing is let everyone know how they can keep in touch with you and learn more.
Yeah, almost all my social media handles are at Palmer Law, my last name, Law, Palmer Law. But as I mentioned earlier, tocivility.org is our website. But if you Google my name, Mark C. Palmer, yes, my dad's name was Charles. That's the C. There you go. Always a connection. You'll find me. And again, please, yeah, connect on social media, LinkedIn and the like. I love engaging with people all around the world.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark, and see you all next time.
See you soon. Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.